come to talk to us tonight. And so I will pass over to Steve Howell to introduce our speaker, please.
Steve, I think you're muted.
He is. He's frantically trying to turn it off. Ah,
right.
Steve.
Well, introducing our speaker tonight is Mr. Matthew Scott. He was elected as Kent's Police and Crime Commissioner back in May 2016 and is doing so well at the job, they've kept him going and haven't held an election yet. He last spoke to the club in March 2018, and the world really has changed since then. So it's going to be fascinating listening to Matthew and some of the challenges he and the Kent Police have faced. So over to you, Matthew.
Oh, thank you very much for the warm welcome. And can you just wave on your screen just to indicate that you can hear me okay? Very good. Thank you very much. It's great to see so many of you all this evening to update you on some of the things that I've been doing as your Police and Crime Commissioner, but also talk a little bit about the current climate. But what I thought I would do is just, begin with a bit of a reminder about what the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner actually does. And obviously, as an elected person with a constituency of 1.8 million people, my main focus is the residents, the businesses and the community groups that make up our great county. So that means that the role is for me is very much to be your voice within policing and criminal justice, to be a voice for victims of crime, to make sure that they get the service that they deserve and justice at the end, to make sure we're looking after vulnerable people, but also to be a voice for the voiceless as well, because as we know, there are many people who don't report crimes, but we still need to provide support to in some way. But it's not just about being a voice for victims and for the voiceless, it's about being a champion for our area, making sure that I'm continuing to speak up for our area, to get the resources that we need, to stand up against crime and antisocial behaviour in all its forms, and make sure that I'm delivering an efficient and effective policing service on your behalf. And I do that in a number of ways. So 3 broad areas that I say this fits under. So firstly, it's about setting the priorities. I'm responsible for setting a police and crime plan for Kent, which contains the priorities for the Chief Constable. I then hold the Chief Constable to account for the delivery against those priorities, so that you are getting the policing service that you want. I do so in public, so you'll be able to actually see some of this on my YouTube channel very soon. The most recent meetings, some of the questions that we had backwards and forwards on how I held him to account on different issues. I do so every week, so every Monday I meet with the Chief Constable to talk about operational issues and recent challenges, and then getting bespoke briefings as well. Ultimately, I do have the power to hire and fire Chief Constables, but it's probably best said it's easier to hire one than it is to fire one. Not that we're planning any changes at the top here anytime soon. Secondly, I'm responsible for the finances of Kent Police. So I set the budget and I set the council tax. And I think at that point, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today in my update to you has been made possible by you as council taxpayers. Up until Boris's government took control, we were, as you know, in a very difficult place with police finances, and a lot of what we have done in the last 4 years has been reliant on your council tax contributions. So a very big thank you to all of you for what you have supported your police force with. And then finally, it's about the people we work with. As I say, I'm now responsible for commissioning services for victims of crime to make sure they get the service that they need. I'm responsible for criminal justice matters, making sure that the CPS and the courts are working together with the police, that victims and witnesses are being looked after in the justice system. And I work with councils and others to make sure that we try and prevent crime from happening in the first place. So those are the 3 broad areas I say I do have responsibility. Of course, as an elected politician, I don't have any policing powers. I don't have any responsibility for how the police operates on a day-to-day basis and where officers are deployed to, but I do hold the Chief Constable to account for it. So there's a very clear dividing line between what my role is and what the Chief Constable's role is. And I have to say it's been an absolutely fascinating experience before COVID of doing this role. And I'll remember one of the very first visits I got to do was to go to the Channel Tunnel and go down into the service tunnels. And about halfway down between England and France, there is my signature in a Sharpie pen on the wall. They did let me do that, don't worry. I'm not just graffitiing the Channel Tunnel. But it was interesting just to go down there and look at different things. And what you've also got down there, because the Channel Tunnel is quite a popular filming location, they've actually got a fake midpoint that they take some filming crews out to about a mile out. And they said, well, you may have seen, Commissioner, a TV show called The Tunnel, where they had a case where it was based on a Scandinavian drama where they found a body, and it was halfway between England and France on the dividing line of the Channel Tunnel. And I said, well, what would you have done in real life if that had happened? And they said, probably kicked it over the border. But it's it's a fascinating thing to be able to go and see. And that's very much what I've tried to do in this role, is to get out and about, is to pre-COVID speak to as many groups as I could in person, to listen, to learn, to change, to adapt, to make sure that you are getting the service that you want. And I think that, you know, we are making some good progress in that area. I'll talk about a few issues. Firstly, we'll talk about police numbers and where we've got to with that. Secondly, we'll talk a little bit about what those numbers are being used to, and then where we're going in the future. So as you all know, as I probably mentioned before, we did lose a lot of police officers between 2010 and 2016. Every police force did, because the budgets were reduced. We lost about 600 police officers in that period. And as I said earlier on, and why I'm so grateful to all of you for your support, is that we've not just been able to put those 600 back, we've actually been able to go further. So with the combination of your council tax and the extra funding we've secured from central government, Kent Police is now the biggest it has ever been. There are more police officers in Kent now than there have ever been at any point in its history. And not only that, the recruitment drive is going to carry on even through COVID. We're going to be recruiting at least another 300 officers over the next 2.5 years, so that Kent Police will have well over 4,100 police officers by March 2023, which in terms of the way we police this county will be transformational, not just in terms of getting back what we had, but the extra capacity that will enable us to deal with the issues that matter to you. We've also been recruiting more PCSOs, a valuable community resource, and we've been putting those into new roles in crime prevention and antisocial behaviour. And we've got plans to make sure that they go out and they're doing problem solving as well as visible patrols in local neighbourhoods. So we've got a good story to tell when it comes to policing in this county. But importantly, I think it's the issues that they're dealing with which are really quite crucial. You will have read about the awful deaths on the streets of London as a result of gangs and drug dealing and what are known as county lines. And those county lines aren't just a problem for the capital city. They're called lines because they literally run telephone lines which sell drugs in our county and in Sussex and in Essex, all around the United Kingdom. And they do bring with them many challenges. They obviously are selling drugs in their county. They bring violence. They exploit young people. And we need to get tough on them. And I'm pleased to say that we are. Whilst London doesn't seem to have got its grip on this yet, here in Kent, we've rolled up in the last couple of months alone 18 county lines. To put that in perspective, that was 25% of our county lines have been rolled up in the last 2 months. And before that, they've been rolled up before. It is a little bit like a whack-a-mole game, because as soon as you take one line out, another one springs up. But we're not going to let up and make Kent a safe place for these people, because they are causing so much harm and so much damage. So that includes targeted stop and search, which is absolutely needed. That includes raids, arrests, intelligence sharing with different police forces. So we're making sure that we're not seeing the violence that happened in London on our streets in Kent. But in terms of some of the things which victims care about too, but obviously some of you may have been a victim of in the past, and my family was a victim of many, many years ago, are things like burglary. Things that, whilst they have reduced over a period of time, are still at the very top of people's priorities, and rightly so, because it's a very invasive and intrusive crime. We have put more officers into what's called the crime squad, and that has meant that we've secured thousands of charges against burglars and robbers over the course of the last 18 months. There are more people serving time in prison who have been caught by the crime squad for burglaries and robberies and vehicle crimes. Really important things that people are passionate about, and we are taking action on. But other things as well, like antisocial behaviour, bringing back town centre bobbies, a really simple idea, but I had an update from the Chief Constable today. The Medway one, for example, 200 arrests in the last year. In Canterbury, helping with the drug supply problem and the street begging that has been going on in the town centre, making it a safer place for people to go. And we're getting some really great feedback from local schools who were starting to say, we don't want to take our kids into the city centre or the town centres anymore. They're now changing their minds, their kids are going back. We've made their town centres safer for them. But it's not just about our towns, it's about our rural communities too. We doubled the size of the rural policing team, and we have one of the largest dedicated rural police responses, not just doing rural, but also doing wildlife crime and hare coursing, and also issues with the Gypsy and Traveller community as well through the Gypsy Liaison team. So these officers that we're recruiting, they're not hiding behind desks, they're not fighting wars on social media, they're not arresting journalists for daring to have an opinion. They're out there fighting crime, which is exactly where they should be. They're being supported by brilliant members of police staff. They're being supported by special constables as well. We've got special constables attached to our rural crime team, our marine unit, our roads policing team, giving up their own time to support those functions as well, which is tremendous to see. And in terms of where we're going in the future, some of the things that we had in the past, I'm sure that we will all remember at some time, police officers visiting our schools to give talks and to educate young people. Again, one of the things that sadly slipped away during recent years, we're bringing back, and we're not just bringing back, we're putting a substantial number of cops into this. We're going to have 70 police officers in Kent dedicated to working exclusively with schools. Not just going into the schools and doing talks, which is really important, and I've supplemented that with some work from local charities. They'll be going on the school journeys, to school, after school, dealing with school children in the town centres, dealing with them outside of school and in school as well, working with the teachers, with the parents and the young people to try and prevent crime, to prevent the gangs, to prevent the drugs, and make the whole situation safer. Excuse me. Also going to be increasing our work around local policing too, and making sure that you see these boots on the ground, which you are paying for, whether you pay for them out of council tax or general taxation, you are paying for this, and it's our priority to make sure that you see them out and about. So some really important investments which are still going on, even though we are in a really difficult national situation. And when it comes to the national situation, when it comes to COVID-19, it has been a challenge for policing in the UK. Here in Kent, I think we've got the balance just about right when it comes to COVID-19. Other police forces have made some mistakes. Pursuing walkers in Derbyshire with a drone was perhaps disproportionate. And there have been examples where maybe the rules have been applied too strictly. We've been quite clear in this county that we lose the support of the public if we don't do this together. So policing in Kent, and much like many other forces, is taking what's called the 4E approach to COVID regulations. That means that they will engage first, they will educate people about the rules, they will encourage them to follow them. And if they don't, then they are liable for a fine. And we are starting to see, only in very small numbers, because actually the public of Kent have been really good at following much of the legislation and the guidance for not wearing a face covering. And we had about 130 fines issued during the lockdown period for people who were breaching the terms of the lockdown. So not very big numbers, but I think a reflection of the fact that by taking that approach and working with the public, not being confrontational, we've achieved the right outcomes for them. But what's the impact been on the force more widely? But in terms of policing itself, crime did fall, as you can imagine, during the COVID period. Before COVID came in and the lockdown came in, we'd actually made some really positive progress on crime and antisocial behaviour. Crime was down 5% last year before the lockdown. And we'll have the crime statistics published this week, which will show that crime fell by 22% during the lockdown. Many crimes obviously were reduced because, well, your home is less likely to be burgled if you're actually in it. There were fewer incidences of businesses being burgled. There were fewer incidences of many offences such as robbery and sexual assaults. But we did see an increase, sadly, in things like domestic abuse and harassment, because those were individuals who were trapped with their abuser, male or female. So we did see an increase in domestic abuse. We're starting to get back to normal now when it comes to the demand on the police. We are still, crime is 1% lower than it was this time last year, just to give you some idea of where that is. Antisocial behaviour is higher than it was last year because we have to report COVID breaches as antisocial behaviour. But I think that generally that 4E's approach has worked here in Kent. It's one of the reasons why at the moment, and I will not take anything for granted, because the public of Kent have responded pretty well, we're not yet facing the same challenges that they are in London or in Manchester or in Liverpool. That's not to say they won't come further down the line, but compliance here has been really positive. And in terms of the organisation itself, yes, it's meant a big change in the way that the force operates. Officers and staff are still out there every single day, but a lot more people working from home. And we were very fortunate to have the opportunity just before the lockdown came in to purchase 800 laptops. That has meant that our sickness rate in Kent has fallen to around 2%. That's an organisation of 6,000 people. So whereas maybe people wouldn't have gone into work if they had a sickness, they're not phoning in sick now, they're just working at home instead. So Kent Police has become more effective and more efficient during this period because they've been able to work more flexibly. Now, again, that's a benefit that we want to try and hold on to after we get through this, and I'm confident that we will. I think it's been an eye-opener. And I know that there are some questions about how we will use the police estate going forward, and I'll come on to them when members wish to ask them. But I think on the whole, the force response has been pretty positive. And the services that I work with have been really good as well. Victim support have received extra funding, as have a lot of charities, to provide more support for victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. And emergency funds have allowed them to keep going and allowed them to work flexibly as well. So the policing service has carried on, the victim service has carried on. We just need the criminal justice response to improve so that we can do best by victims of crime. So I hope that that's been an interesting run through of where we got to before COVID, but also where we are during the current situation. We're not in one of the tier 2 or tier 3 of these new lockdowns which have been proposed. We'll stay in medium for the long term, I believe, and then the decision will be reviewed. But I think the public of Kent have genuinely responded really, really well. And I hope that some of the things that we want to do, such as our new schools officers, a new crime academy, more investment in gangs and county lines, more visible policing on the street, you'll start to notice more of that over the next few months. If we stay out of lockdown, of course, if we're all locked down again, maybe you won't. But can I just say thank you again for the opportunity to update you on some of these things. I hope it's been quite interesting, and